Okay, so see how I look on camera right now? You're hopefully seeing me with soft light shining on one side of my face and the other side a little bit, although not completely, in shadow. A little bit separated from the background and in focus, where the background is less in focus. And of course, there's a long way to go. My camera lens is general purpose, so I can't really get that shallow depth of field like a Netflix doc. My light isn't that great yet. I don't have a true overhead light, etc. You don't have to wind the clock back very far to find videos that look way worse. In fact, longtime fans know production quality has long been a distant second priority to running and gunning here at 8020. Get the message out, damn the production quality. Stop obsessing over perfect shots, just post videos. And that worked pretty well in 2014 when I started posting videos. Oh wow, 10-year anniversary actually. But over the years, production quality has gone up steadily on YouTube. With the advent of affordable high-quality cameras, lenses, and lights, with the ever-increasing number of tutorials available for free, to such an extent that now the state-of-the-art in even drum videos is almost television quality. And one of the creators who spearheaded that was Brandon Scott. Even back in the day, his lighting and shots were above the average. But over the years, he's upped his game, to the point where he's one of the best videographers among drum YouTubers, and maybe even on YouTube writ large. That's why he's now a full-time videographer for the giants, Drumeo. Meanwhile, 8020 production quality has stayed pretty static. Just camera in the room, me talking to the camera. And don't even talk to me about audio, that's another video. But this past year, I decided, enough! I was finally gonna improve my production quality here at 8020. If it killed me. After some stabs in the dark, something occurred to me. Why not just get Brandon on the line to help me out?
Oh my God, you're recording me?
And like the mensch he is, Brandon agreed.
We can dig right in if you want to.
Yeah, let's go right to it. So you know where this is headed. If you're a small creator just getting started, you might be wondering, do I need to buy a 4K camera? Do I need a fancy studio? Do I need fancy practical lights and a Shure SM7B on the desk? Or even more basically, how do I take a drum video that looks like this and make it look at least a little better? We'll answer all of that with Brandon, whose complete podcast interview will go live on this channel next Monday or Tuesday. Today on 8020, Drumeo videographer schools me on production quality. Stay tuned. So dudes, we're going to get on the horn with Brandon. We're going to talk through a lot of concepts, and you're probably going to want some notes about that. And you may even be interested in my equipment list, including the key light Mike Johnston recommended to me that I'm going to buy when I get back from Spain. We put that all together for you in a nice little thing called a PDF, a PDF, as they say in España. And all you have to do is click El Botón underneath the player there, guy. We'll email that to you for free. Let's get on with the show. Let's first talk about the camera. If my current shot looks better than you used to, it's only because I finally learned how to set it to manual. And production quality is an intricate dance of camera setting and lights and, well, mainly those two things, I guess. Yeah, there aren't really other things. Sorry. And before we talk about any lights, let's talk camera.
In a perfect studio setting, they would do that. So they would set the camera settings to the best possible settings to make it look as good as they want, and then adjust the lights accordingly. Like a lot of the expensive lights go like so bright, and then you can just tweak them, go and then adjust it that way.
And let's get examples. Here's Craig Reynolds, who should come on my podcast. Here's some random footage from a Netflix documentary. Now, here's a shot from the middle period of the 8020 channel. Notice something different? Those pro-looking videos all have the subject in focus and the background blurry, and often darker than the subject. And this effect is called depth of field. Here's Brandon to explain it to us.
The next biggest important thing I would say is the aperture. Because the lower the aperture, the shallower depth of field you get. So that'll separate you from the background. Like I noticed that in this guy's video, Craig Reynolds, he's running it at a lower aperture because the background is blurry and he is like tack sharp in focus in the foreground.
So we won't get too into lenses. Suffice it to say, if you have a general purpose zoom lens like I do, your f-stop is only going to go solo. By the way, aperture and f-stop same thing. I could get another camera and film me resetting the f-stop on my actual camera, but I'd rather just fair use some footage from one of the best media channels on YouTube, Think Media.
When you turn your camera on and you put it in manual mode, you're gonna see some stuff on your screen, and one of these things is the letter F followed by a number. Now that is your f-stop.
Now is the part of the video where we start putting this advice to use. Step 1. Setting your camera to manual. And I'll fill in the blanks around some of the advice we get from various spots. And the advantage to the manual setting is you can control your depth of field independent of those other factors like brightness. So just set it to manual and crank the f-stop to the stops, right? As low as possible, in other words. Well, not so fast. Here's a shot of the studio when I change my camera from auto to manual and select the lowest f-stop setting. Notice how dark it is? That's where our next setting comes in, ISO. Here's Brandon explaining ISO a little.
For one, you do need enough light in the room. That way your camera isn't shooting at a high ISO, because a high ISO means a lot of noise. You know, in the dark shadows up here, you'll get like little specks of purple and green popping around.
So you can use ISO to let more light in, but especially with cheap cameras, you really don't want to set it any higher than 800. Here's my manual shot as I crank the ISO up to 800, which is basically the limit if I don't want graininess. Still a little dark, right? There is one more thing you can play with, and that's shutter speed. But Brandon and the pros say you don't have much wiggle room there.
Shutter speed is kind of a bit different when you're taking photos versus video. So in video, it depends what frame rate you're shooting. Your shutter speed should depend on what frame rate you're shooting. So if you're shooting 24 frames a second, you want the shutter speed to be 1/48. They basically say double the frame rate.
So the shutter speed is usually fixed at twice the frame rate, which, if we're shooting basic video we want to look good, is 24 frames per second. So shutter at 1/48, which on my camera is 1/50. Here's what that looks like. Still a little dark, right? If you're a purist, you're supposed to achieve everything else with lighting. In fact, a real filmmaker would even set the ISO in the sweet spot and do the rest with lighting. Oh, wait. Step 2. Key lighting.
In a perfect studio setting, they would do that. So they'd set the camera settings to the best possible settings to make it look as good as they want, and then adjust the lights accordingly. Like a lot of the expensive lights go like so bright, and then you can just tweak them, go and then adjust it that way.
Note that Brandon says in an ideal world here. In the real world, we can still use the ISO up to 800 if we don't have great lighting. Next, let's talk about the number one thing Brandon thinks I was getting wrong with lighting. For reference, I sent him my recent video, and Craig Reynolds, who should really come on the podcast, video. Here was Brandon's take.
So you need enough light in the room so your camera can, absorb the light. But also, it depends on the lighting source. So again, a lot of people think a bunch of tiny little LED lights will be sick. I would rather have one big softbox than 10 small LEDs. The reason a softbox is great is because it's a bigger light source, and the bigger the light source, the softer the shadows will be. Imagine if you take a flashlight and shine it at something, the shadow on the wall is gonna be like an exact image of the thing that you're shining the light on. But if you have a softbox, you have light coming from this side, and it softens that background shadow.
So I don't have a super great big light in the studio, even though I have some really high quality, smaller LED boxes. But I do have a mediocre big light with the softbox. So while I'm waiting for March to come when I get back to Spain and I can order better lights, let's at least set up the mediocre softbox and let you see. Here's a shot of me in the studio with those manual camera settings we discussed, with no extra light. And now here it is with the key light. There's maybe a little bit of a dance here because it's a small room, and if I want my background to be dark, I can't have the key light too bright. But I want it bright enough that I'm well lit as a subject. I can also reduce the ISO on my camera if the room looks too bright. But where do you put the key light? Let's listen to Brandon describe it.
It's actually called Rembrandt lighting. I think because this painter, something Rembrandt back in the day, used to paint people, and they used to have this little triangle on their cheek that the light would create. It's called a Rembrandt triangle. But it just makes for a more dimension and more contrast, and you look like more 3D.
So here's my shot with the key light off to the side, with no other light in the studio. As Brandon says, if you want to keep it simple, especially if you're on a budget, this is pretty much all you have to do.
Honestly, if you have one key light with a softbox, it would look beautiful. You can shut every other light off in the room and have that key light like 45 degrees off the side of your face, and you're good to go. Everything else is just like icing on the cake. When people have like neon lights behind them and stuff, that's just like little icing to create some kind of depth between them, you know?
But I don't want to keep it simple. I want the fancy stuff, the obnoxious stuff. And for that, we have the 3 light setup. Step 3. Obnoxious extra lights I'm all about. Let's let our friends over at Think Media introduce it.
So the key light is on the right side of Heather's face, and this is the main light. And really it doesn't matter if it's on the left side or the right side. The fill light is gonna be on the opposite side of the key light. So this is our fill light, and we're using another newer light. And if I turn this off, you can see that the shadows are pretty dark on Heather's face. And so when I turn this light back on, it adds a nice fill into her left side. And this just makes the shadows not as dark. And this is the backlight. It's the 3rd light in this setup. So the main purpose of this backlight is to create separation between the subject and the background.
And then if you want, you can use a fill light to kind of fill in the shadow on this side.
Yeah.
But it would be a lot dimmer.
So we've got a key light, which we talked about. Then fill light, which lessens the shadows, especially if we want kind of a dramatic shot with a little darker room. Then the overhead, which is the most optional. Brandon has a fancy overhead.
I like just the top light on the drums because it gives that like police interrogation vibe, you know, like, and it just makes it look super dramatic.
And you have it built into the drop ceiling there, right?
Yeah, I made this like little cloud thing. So
Sick.
there's also that's all insulation in there. And then I cut a hole in the middle. And I used to work in a wood shop too, where we'd build like kitchens and stuff like that. So I kind of learned how to build things, but it's super easy.
But as the Think Media folks demonstrate, you can just use something off to the side, slightly behind, and slightly above the subject. Here I am with only the key light. And here I am with the fill light. Now, here I am with the overhead, which helps to create separation from the background. Finally, you know those neon artifacts or old-timey lamps YouTubers like to have in the background? Those are called practical lights. Those are not necessary, and in a lot of pro filmmaking, you won't even see them. But they do add a cool dimension to your YouTube studio. That's why I moved my trusty table lamp from my apartment to the studio. Here's Think Media talking about why practical lights help.
We purposely put that lamp in the background to motivate this backlight, so it looks like this light is going onto Heather because of the lamp.
So let's just pause and show you the difference. Here's a shot with just the room lights and the camera on automatic mode. And here's the shot with the manual settings and all the lights set up. It's still a far cry from Craig Reynolds or Brandon, and one of the things we won't get into this video is the next level pro stuff, which is color grading, but that's a thing.
There's a setting on your camera where you can choose to shoot in a flatter color profile. I don't know if your camera will have it. This camera does not have it, and it's called log. It's basically a super low contrast image that retains all of the information. So when you bring it into the editor, you can then add in the contrast and color grade it to look exactly how you want.
But we can get much better results even with our factory setting just by using the manual mode, some settings, and some mood lighting. Now, let's see if we can duplicate the effect on the drums. Here's some before footage of just me playing with the room lights and the camera set to auto. Now, I'll turn out all the room lights, set up the key light with a softbox, run it pretty bright, then I'll use all that camera magic to optimize. Lowest f-stop possible, ISO to 800 or less, and make up the rest with light in the room. Shutter speed to 1/48th or 1/50th on my Canon. Here's the shot with those settings. I'm gonna go with no fill light because I don't think the shadows are super strong and I'm getting enough fill from the practical light. But I will attach one of my Elanzi mini LED lights to a boom mic stand to get some overhead light. Then I'll turn on my little LED in the back and my lamp behind me for some practicals. Oh, I almost forgot. What angle does Brandon like to shoot the drums from?
You can't go wrong with just like the straight on drum angle. I just make sure the lines are all squared up. I actually hate the angles where you're like looking down on the kit. I do hate that. But
You mean like the overheads?
oh no, I don't mind an overhead, like a straight down overhead, because again, like that's like a Wes Anderson symmetrical thing.
So we'll try this straight on shot like Wes Anderson. Here's the before and here's the after. So what did we learn? Well, as you might be expecting, we learned you can get pretty far without much expensive equipment with just a little bit of expertise. And that it doesn't actually take all that much effort to get the expertise, you just have to have the desire. Did we do something here today, you guys? Oh my gosh. Don't know why I'm using 1950s vernacular. I'm perfectly fine swearing in other circumstances. Anyway, you guys, if you want to get that free equipment list with my show notes or whatever, just click the link below. You can download that for free. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks again to Brandon for coming on and helping me out. Check out that podcast when it airs. I'll put the link here. See you guys soon in another Lesson of the Week.